Hello, darlings. Welcome to GloomWhispers, our dark corner of the internet where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm Gloomy, your host for all things eerie and mysterious. Leave a comment and hit subscribe and the bell for more haunting tales that will leave you enthralled and unsettled. The Haunting of Blackwood Manor. In the remote countryside of England stood Blackwood Manor, a grand but dilapidated estate that had been uninhabited for decades. Known locally as the House of Shadows, the manor had a dark history. Legend had it that the original owner, Lord Blackwood, had dabbled in dark magic and was responsible for the mysterious disappearances of several villagers in the 1800s. When the manor was put up for sale, the Smith family, eager to escape the bustle of city life, purchased it at a surprisingly low price. Despite warnings from locals, they moved in, charmed by the manor's old-world elegance and sprawling grounds. They planned to restore the estate to its former glory, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. From the first night, strange things began to happen. Doors would creak open by themselves, and cold drafts would sweep through the rooms even though all the windows were closed. The family dismissed these occurrences as typical old house quirks until one evening when young Emily Smith reported seeing a figure standing at the foot of her bed. Emily described the figure as a tall man in old-fashioned clothes and hollow eyes with a twisted smile. Her parents, rational and skeptical, assured her it was just a bad dream. But the next night, the figure returned, closer this time, whispering unintelligible words that sent chills down her spine. The following weeks were a descent into terror. Objects would move on their own, pictures fell from walls, shattering glass and frames. The family cat refused to enter certain rooms, hissing and arching its back at unseen entities. The children began to wake up with scratches and bruises, as if they had been attacked in their sleep. One night, Mr. Smith, determined to put an end to the disturbances, set up cameras around the house. Reviewing the footage, he saw shadows moving independently of any light source and doors slamming shut with no one near them. But the most chilling sight was the figure of a man, his face distorted and eyes glowing, standing in the hallway, staring directly at the camera before vanishing into thin air. The Smiths, now desperate, called a paranormal investigator. The investigator was an elderly woman named Agnes, and she arrived with an air of calm authority. She immediately sensed the malevolent presence and conducted a seance to communicate with the spirit. During the seance, Agnes learned that the entity was indeed Lord Blackwood, who had bound his spirit to the manor through dark rituals, feeding on the fear of those who dared to live there. Agnes attempted to perform a cleansing ritual, but Lord Blackwood's spirit was too powerful. The seance room filled with a cold, oppressive blackness. The walls shook, and a deep, guttural voice boomed, "Leave this place or suffer my wrath." The windows shattered, and the candles blew out, plunging the room into complete darkness. The Smiths were terrified, but they felt trapped. They had invested their life savings into the manor and had nowhere else to go. Agnes, sympathetic to their plight, decided to stay and help them fight the malevolent spirit. She set up protective wards around the house and instructed the family to follow certain rituals to keep the spirit at bay. For a few days, it seemed like the wards were working. The disturbances ceased and a sense of calm returned to the manor. However, this respite was short-lived. One night, as the family sat in the living room, they heard a loud crash from the basement. Mr. Smith grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. As he descended the stairs, the temperature dropped and he could see his breath in the cold air. The flashlight flickered and then died, leaving him in complete darkness. Suddenly, he felt a cold hand grab his shoulder and a voice whispered, "You cannot escape me." Mr. Smith ran upstairs, his heart pounding. The family decided they could no longer stay in the manor and began packing their belongings. As they hurriedly gathered their things, the house seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. Shadows darted across the walls, and the air was filled with eerie whispers and distant screams. Agnes realized that the only way to truly rid the manor of Lord Blackwood's spirit was to find and destroy the source of his power. She remembered the old legends about Blackwood practicing dark rituals and suspected that the source of his power was hidden somewhere in the manor. The family and Agnes began a frantic search, going through every room, attic, and hidden nook in the old house. In the library, behind a bookcase, they found a hidden door leading to a small secret room. Inside, they discovered an altar with strange symbols and an old dusty book bound in leather. As they approached the altar, the air grew colder and a sense of dread filled the room. Agnes carefully examined the book and realized it contained detailed instructions for the dark rituals Blackwood had performed. Among the pages, she found a passage that described how Blackwood had bound his spirit to the manor. To break the curse, they needed to destroy the book and the altar. As they prepared to destroy the items, the house began to shake violently. The walls bled with dark, viscous fluid, and the air was filled with unearthly howls. The ghost of Lord Blackwood materialized, his face twisted with rage. "You cannot defeat me," he bellowed, his voice shaking the very foundation of the house. Ignoring the apparition, Agnes began to chant an incantation from the book. As she chanted, the ghost screamed in agony and tried to attack her, but he was held back by the protective wards that she had placed earlier. With a final, powerful incantation, Agnes set the book and the altar on fire. The flames roared, consuming the dark artifacts. As the book burned, Blackwood's ghost let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished in a flash of blinding light. The house stopped shaking and an eerie silence filled the air. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and relief. The Smith family, though shaken, was finally free from the haunting. They thanked Agnes for her help and decided to leave Blackwood Manor for good. They moved back to the city, never looking back. The manor, now free of its dark curse, stood empty once more, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. The story of the Smith family and the haunting of Blackwood Manor became a local legend. Visitors to the area would often stop by the old crumbling estate, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous House of Shadow. But those who dared to venture too close would always leave with a sense of unease, as if the malevolent spirit of Lord Blackwood still lingered, watching and waiting for his next victims. Haunted Honeymoon. When Emily and David decided to get married, the idea of a honeymoon cruise seemed perfect. David loved the sea, and Emily, eager to confront her lifelong fear of water, agreed. Despite her anxiety, she trusted David's assurance that the cruise would be a relaxing adventure. Yet, as the date approached, her dread grew. The day of departure was bright and sunny. The ship, a massive floating city, gleamed under the sky. Emily's stomach churned with apprehension as they boarded, her smile tight but determined. David, full of excitement, guided her through the grand hallways, pointing out amenities and activities. The first night on the ship was uneventful. They dined in an opulent restaurant, where David chatted about their plans while Emily tried to suppress her nervous glances at the windows, framing the vast, dark ocean. Later, they stood on their private balcony, the moon casting a silvery glow over the undulating waves. David held her close, reassuring her that everything would be fine. But as night fell, Emily's sleep was restless. She dreamed of dark waters, of drowning and being pulled into the depths by unseen forces. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. David slept soundly beside her, oblivious to her unease. She shook off the nightmare and tried to convince herself it was just her nerves. The next day, they explored the ship. Emily forced herself to relax, joining David in activities and even managing to laugh at his antics. They found a beautiful lounge at the ship's bow, where they enjoyed cocktails and watched the sunset. For a moment, Emily's fears seemed distant. That night, however, the nightmare returned. This time, it was more vivid. She was on the deck, alone, when the ship seemed to vanish, leaving her floating in the endless sea. Dark shapes moved beneath the surface, whispering her name, and she felt cold, slimy hands pulling her down. She woke up screaming, startling David awake. "It's just a dream, Em," he said, holding her close. "You're safe with me." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The ship, which had seemed so grand and inviting, now felt oppressive and sinister. As they wandered the corridors, she noticed subtle changes. The lights flickered, and strange, almost imperceptible sounds echoed through the halls. She tried to tell David, but he brushed it off as her imagination. On the third night, things took a darker turn. They attended a formal dinner where Emily found herself seated next to an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes. The woman stared at her, unblinking, and leaned in to whisper, "The sea knows your fear. It will claim you." Emily recoiled, but when she looked again, the woman was gone, her seat empty. She turned to David, but he hadn't noticed anything. Panic clawed at her, and she excused herself, rushing to their cabin. David followed, concerned. "Emily, what's wrong?" She tried to explain, but her words came out jumbled, her fear overwhelming. David, though worried, insisted it was just stress and fatigue. He suggested they rest and take it easy the next day. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window staring out at the moonlit ocean. Her reflection in the glass seemed to shift, her eyes dark and hollow. She blinked and it was gone, but the unease remained. She turned away, deciding to lie down, when she heard a soft, melodic humming. She followed the sound through the dimly lit hallways. It led her to the pool area, eerily deserted at this hour. The water was dark, almost black, and the humming grew louder. She approached, drawn by an unseen force. Suddenly, a hand shot out of the water, grasping her ankle. She screamed, pulling away and stumbling back. The hand disappeared, leaving only ripples in the water. Heart pounding, she ran back to the cabin, where David found her huddled in a corner, trembling. "Emily, you're scaring me. What happened?" She could only shake her head, unable to articulate the terror she felt. David held her until she calmed down, but sleep eluded her. She spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The following day, Emily refused to leave the cabin. David, frustrated but trying to be supportive, brought her meals and stayed with her, reading aloud to distract her. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision, and the ship's creaks and groans sounded like whispers. That evening, David convinced her to join him for a walk on the deck. The air was cool and the sea was calm, but Emily's anxiety was palpable. They walked in silence, David holding her hand reassuringly. As they reached the ship's stern, Emily froze. The elderly woman from the dinner stood there, staring out at the sea. She turned to Emily, her eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "It's almost time," she said. David saw her this time, his face going pale. "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman smiled, a chilling expression. "The sea never forgets. It knows her fear. It will take her, as it has taken so many before." Emily was filled with a cold dread. "David, let's go," she said, pulling him away. They hurried back to their cabin, but the sense of impending doom was overwhelming. David locked the door, trying to comfort Emily, but she could see the fear in his eyes now. They sat together, the tension thick between them. The ship seemed to groan louder, the lights flickering more intensely. Suddenly the room grew unbearably cold. A thick fog seeped through the cracks of the door. Swirling around them, the humming returned, louder and more menacing. "Emily, stay close to me," David said, his voice shaking. The fog coalesced into a shape, a spectral figure of the elderly woman. She floated towards them, her eyes dark voids. "The sea has come for you, Emily," she said. Emily screamed, but no sound came out. She clung to David, feeling his heart race against hers. The figure reached out, her cold fingers brushing Emily's cheek. Instantly, memories flooded her mind, drowning in dark waters, being pulled under by invisible forces, the crushing weight of the ocean above. David tried to pull Emily away, but the figure's grip was like iron. "You cannot escape your fate," she whispered. In a final act of desperation, Emily shouted, "Leave us alone." The figure paused, her eyes narrowing. For a moment, the ship seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a final piercing scream, the figure dissolved into the fog, which dissipated into the air. The temperature returned to normal, and the lights stabilized. Emily and David sat in stunned silence, the ordeal leaving them shaken to the core. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion. As dawn broke, the ship's intercom crackled to life, announcing an emergency stop at a nearby port. Passengers were advised to disembark due to unforeseen technical issues. David and Emily didn't need to be told twice. They gathered their belongings and joined the throng of passengers leaving the ship. As they stepped onto solid ground, Emily felt a weight lift from her chest. They found a small hotel in the port town, where they tried to process what had happened. David held Emily close, his voice gentle but firm. "We're safe now. It's over." But Emily knew the sea's call would never truly leave her. The memory of the spectral figure, the chilling whispers, and the dark, endless waters would haunt her forever. As they prepared to return home, Emily made a silent vow. She would never set foot on a ship again. The sea, with its unfathomable depths and ancient secrets, had shown her its true face, and she knew she would never forget. The Living Library. The town of Ashford had always been a place of mystery, its cobblestone streets lined with ancient buildings and shrouded in an air of forgotten secrets. At the heart of the town stood a decrepit, ivy-covered building that locals referred to as the Sanctum. Few knew of its purpose, and even fewer dared to enter. It was said to be a library, but not just any library, an ancient repository of forgotten knowledge and dark secrets. Eleanor Gray, a devoted bibliophile, had always been drawn to the Sanctum. She had spent countless hours in libraries around the world, immersing herself in the worlds contained within their pages. The Sanctum, however, held a particular allure. Stories circulated about its collection of rare, enchanted books, each containing more than mere words. Driven by her insatiable curiosity, Eleanor decided it was time to uncover the truth for herself. On a foggy autumn evening, Eleanor stood before the grand wooden doors of the Sanctum. The wind whispered through the trees, as if warning her to turn back. With a determined breath, she pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. The interior was vast and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and ink. Rows upon rows of towering bookshelves stretched out before her, filled with volumes of every shape and size. As Eleanor wandered deeper into the library, she felt an uncanny sensation, as if she were being watched. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to the eerie atmosphere. Her fingers traced the spines of the books, each one labeled in a language she couldn't decipher. Finally, she pulled a particularly ornate volume from the shelf. The cover was embossed with intricate designs and a title that seemed to shimmer: The Book of Souls. Without thinking, Eleanor opened the book. The pages were filled with beautiful flowing script that seemed to dance before her eyes. She began to read, feeling a strange compulsion to continue. The further she read, the more the world around her seemed to fade away, until all that remained were the words on the page and the story they told. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time seemed to lose all meaning. When Eleanor finally looked up from the book, she found herself in a different part of the library. The room was darker, the shadows deeper and more oppressive. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, as if anchored to the floor. A chilling realization dawned on her. She was trapped. Panic surged through her as she glanced around, desperate for a way out. It was then that she noticed the books on the shelves. They were no longer just books. They were watching her. Eyes, faint but unmistakable, blinked from the spines, following her every movement. Eleanor's heart raced as she heard a rustling sound behind her. She turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. A tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a ghostly pallor. He was dressed in tattered robes, and his presence exuded an aura of ancient power and malevolence. "Welcome to the Sanctum, Eleanor," the figure said, his voice echoing through the room. "I am the librarian, the guardian of this place." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "What do you want with me?" The librarian's eyes glinted. "You have read the Book of Souls. You are now bound to this library, as are all who have come before you. Each book you see contains the consciousness of a person who has read it cover to cover. Their souls are trapped within these pages, their lives entwined with the stories they sought." Eleanor's mind raced. There must be a way to free them, to free myself. The librarian's expression darkened. "There is, but it is not easily done. You must find the key to the library's heart, a hidden tome known as the Codex Liberati. It contains the spell to release the souls trapped within these books. But beware, the path to the Codex is fraught with peril, and time is not on your side. If you fail, you will become just another story in this library, forever bound to its pages. Determined to escape and free the trapped souls, Eleanor set off through the labyrinth-like corridors of the sanctum. The librarian's haunting presence lingered behind her, a constant reminder of the stakes. She moved quickly, scanning the shelves for any clue that might lead her to the Codex Liberati. As she ventured deeper into the library, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The shadows seemed to reach out to her, and strange whispers echoed through the halls. She passed by books that emanated an eerie glow, their covers shifting and pulsing with a life of their own. Each step she took was met with a sense of foreboding, as if the library itself were trying to dissuade her from her quest. Eleanor stumbled upon a small alcove, its walls lined with ancient maps and scrolls. In the center stood a pedestal upon which rested an old leather-bound journal. She opened it cautiously, scanning the pages for any hint of the Codex Liberati's location. The journal belonged to a previous visitor, one who had also sought the elusive tome. His writings detailed a series of trials he had faced, each more harrowing than the last. One entry caught her eye. The Codex lies beyond the Hall of Echoes, in a chamber guarded by the spirits of the damned. Only the pure of heart can pass through unscathed. Eleanor steeled herself and continued her search, her resolve strengthened by the journal's revelations. She soon found herself in the Hall of Echoes, a vast cavernous space filled with rows of mirrors. As she stepped inside, the air grew colder and her breath formed visible puffs in the dim light. The mirrors reflected not just her physical form, but her fears and doubts as well. Faces twisted in agony and despair stared back at her, their eyes pleading for release. She pressed on, refusing to let the haunting images deter her. Halfway through the hall, a voice called out to her, "Eleanor, help us." She turned to see a young boy in one of the mirrors, his face pale and frightened. "Please, you have to save us." "I will," she promised, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I'll find the Codex and free you all." The boy nodded, his image fading as she moved forward. The further she went, the louder the whispers became, each one a fragment of a soul trapped within the library's confines. Their collective desperation spurred her on, driving her to reach the end of the hall. At last, she emerged into a circular chamber, its walls adorned with arcane symbols and ancient texts. In the center stood a pedestal upon which rested a large ornate book, the Codex Liberati. Eleanor approached it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As her fingers brushed the cover, a wave of energy surged through her. The room darkened and the air grew thick with malevolent force. The spirits of the damned appeared around her, their ghostly forms writhing and contorting in pain. They reached out to her, their touch cold and draining. Eleanor fought to maintain her focus. She knew that only by reciting the incantation within the Codex could she free the trapped souls. Eleanor fought to maintain her focus. She knew that only by reciting the incantation within the Codex could she free the trapped souls. She opened the book, its pages filled with symbols that seemed to shift and change before her eyes. Summoning all her willpower, she began to read aloud. "By the power of the ancient words, I command thee, spirits bound by ink and paper, to be freed from this eternal prison. Return to the world of the living, and may your souls find peace." The spirits screamed and writhed as the incantation took hold. A blinding light filled the chamber, and Eleanor felt herself being lifted off the ground. The spectral forms dissolved into the air, their anguished cries fading into silence. When the light subdued, Eleanor found herself back in the library's main hall. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. The books on the shelves no longer watched her. They were just books once more. The librarian appeared before her, his expression unreadable. "You have done what no other has accomplished," he said. "You have freed the souls trapped within these pages. Your courage and determination have broken the curse that bound them." Eleanor took a deep breath, relief flooding through her. "May I leave now?" The librarian nodded. "You are free to go, but remember, the knowledge you have gained here comes with a great responsibility. Use it wisely." With that, he stepped aside, allowing Eleanor to make her way to the exit. As she pushed open the heavy wooden doors, she glanced back one more time. The library, once a place of darkness and despair, now seemed almost welcoming. She stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of her ordeal lifting from her shoulders. Eleanor returned to her home in Ashford, forever changed by her experience. She continued her love of books, but with newfound respect for the power they could hold. The sanctum remained a mystery to the townspeople, but to Eleanor it was a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of knowledge. She often thought of the souls she had freed, hoping they had found the peace they deserved. She often thought of the souls she had freed, hoping they had found the peace they deserved. While she never returned to the sanctum, she knew that a part of her would always remain connected to that ancient magical place. A place where stories lived and where the brave could change the course of fate itself. The doll in the attic. In the small, picturesque town of Ravenswood, old houses with dark secrets were as common as the cobblestone streets that wound their way through the village. At the edge of town, nestled among towering oak trees, stood an ancient Victorian mansion known as the Whitmore House. Its once glorious facade was now a decaying shadow of its past, but it was the attic of this house that held the darkest secret of all. Emma and Mark, a young couple, had recently moved to Ravenswood, drawn to its quaint charm and serene atmosphere. One chilly autumn afternoon, they decided to explore the local thrift stores, hoping to find unique items to decorate their new home. As they browsed through the dusty shelves and crowded aisles of Second Chances, a small, unassuming shop on the edge of town, Emma's eyes fell on a particular item. It was a doll dressed in lace-trimmed dress with a porcelain face and glassy blue eyes. Its dark curls were matted with dust, but there was something about it that seemed almost lifelike. Emma picked it up, feeling an inexplicable connection to the doll. She turned to Mark, who was examining a stack of vintage records. "Look at this," she said, holding the doll up for him to see. Mark frowned slightly. "It's a bit creepy, don't you think?" Emma shrugged. "I think it's charming. It has character." They bought the doll for a few dollars, along with a couple of other knickknacks, and brought them home. Emma cleaned up the doll and placed it on the mantel in the living room. That night, as they settled into bed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. She heard faint, almost imperceptible whispers, but when she strained to listen, there was nothing but silence. She dismissed it as her imagination and drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, Mark noticed the doll on the mantel and sighed. "I can't believe you bought that," he said. Emma replied, "I thought it was too beautiful to leave there." Mark shrugged, though he felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something unsettling about those glassy blue eyes. Days passed and strange things began to happen. Emma often felt a cold presence behind her, and objects would move on their own. She would find the doll in different places around the house, even though she was sure she had left it on the mantel. Once, she found it on her bedside table, its eyes staring straight at her. One evening, when Mark was working late, Emma decided to do some research on the Whitmore house. She discovered an old article about the disappearance of the Whitmore family. The article mentioned a little girl named Eliza, who had a beloved doll that also went missing along with the family. The more Emma read, the more she felt a connection to Eliza. She began to have vivid dreams of a little girl in a white dress playing with the doll in the attic. The dreams always ended the same way, with Eliza's terrified scream echoing in her ears. One night, Emma woke up to find the doll laying next to her in bed. She screamed, waking Mark, who immediately saw the doll and grabbed it. "Emma, this has gone too far. We need to get rid of this thing," he said, his voice trembling. They decided to burn the doll. They took it outside to the fire pit, doused it in lighter fluid, and set it ablaze. As the flames consumed the doll, they heard a high-pitched scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The fire roared higher, casting eerie shadows on the house. Believing they had finally rid themselves of the doll's curse, they returned to bed, but the nightmare was far from over. That night, Emma had the most vivid dream yet. She was in the attic, and Eliza stood before her, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you burn her?" Eliza sobbed. "Now she'll never let us go." Emma woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. She heard whispers again, louder this time, and followed them to the attic. There, she found the doll, completely unscathed, sitting on a wooden chest. She noticed a name had been carved into the chest. Eliza, it read, and now below it, her own name, Emma. She felt a chill run down her spine. She turned to leave, but the attic door slammed shut. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. She felt an icy hand on her shoulder and turned to see Eliza, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Help us," Eliza whispered. "She won't let us go." Emma woke up on the attic floor, the morning light streaming through the window. She ran downstairs to tell Mark what had happened, but he was gone. She searched the house frantically, calling his name, but there was no answer. Emma ran to the living room where she found the doll, sitting on the mantel, its eyes now a deep, malevolent red. Emma knew she had to find a way to break the curse and free the spirits trapped in the house. She spent hours in the local library, poring over old records and articles and books on the occult. She found an old article, an interview with a woman who knew the Whitmore family and knew about the doll. She discovered that the doll had been cursed by a vengeful spirit named Annabelle, who had been wronged by the Whitmore family. Annabelle had taken revenge by trapping their souls in the doll, and anyone who moved into the house was doomed to suffer the same fate. Emma knew she had to perform a ritual to banish Annabelle's spirit and free the trapped souls. She gathered the necessary items, and that night she went to the attic and set up the ritual. As she began to chant, the air grew colder and the whispers returned, louder than ever. The doll's eyes glowed brighter, and it seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Emma felt a force trying to push her away, but she held her ground, continuing the incantation. Suddenly, the doll levitated, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged from it. The figure had hollow eyes and a twisted smile. It lunged at Emma, but she stood her ground, chanting louder and louder. The shadowy figure screamed in rage as the candles flickered and the attic shook. Emma felt the cold grip of fear tightening around her heart, But she didn't stop. Finally, with one last desperate chant, the shadowy figure disintegrated into a cloud of smoke, and the doll fell to the floor, its eyes now lifeless. The house grew silent, and Emma felt the dark presence lift. She felt a sense of peace wash over her. She looked down at the doll, now just a lifeless toy, and knew that the spirits were finally free. Mark returned later that day, unharmed but with no recollection of where he had been. He found Emma in the living room, exhausted but relieved. She told him everything that had happened, and they decided to bury the doll in the garden, ensuring it could never harm anyone again. Life returned to normal for Emma and Mark, but they never forgot the horrors that they had faced. The Whitmore house was no longer haunted, but the memories lingered, a reminder of the darkness that had once lurked within its walls. As for the doll, it remained buried, its curse seemingly broken. But every now and then, on a cold autumn night, the wind would whisper through the trees, and the townsfolk would swear they heard the faint, eerie laughter of a little girl echoing through the streets of Ravenswood. The Haunting Lens. Anna Cartwright was a photographer known for her uncanny ability to capture the eerie and macabre. Her portfolio was filled with chilling shots of abandoned hospitals, decrepit houses, and desolate cemeteries. Yet, she was always in search of the next haunting location to fuel her passion and her work. It was this quest that led her to Pine Hollow, a small town that was rumored to be one of the most haunted places in America. Pine Hollow had a dark history that intrigued Anna. Founded in the early 1800s, it had thrived as a mining town until a series of tragic accidents and mysterious deaths led to its abandonment. The townsfolk whispered of vengeful spirits, apparitions, and eerie occurrences that had plagued the area ever since. Few dared to visit, and even fewer stayed long enough to uncover the truth. Determined to capture the essence of Pine Hollow, Anna packed her camera gear and drove the winding, fog-laden roads that led to the forsaken town. The journey was long and treacherous, with the dense forest encroaching on the narrow path, but Anna was undeterred. As she neared her destination, the trees seemed to close in, casting long, twisted shadows that danced ominously in her headlights. The town appeared suddenly, emerging from the mist like a specter. Dilapidated buildings lined the main street, their windows shattered and their facades crumbling. Weeds and vines crept over the decaying structures, reclaiming what had been lost. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Anna parked her car in front of what had once been the town's general store. She grabbed her camera and began her exploration, snapping pictures of the eerie surroundings. Each shot seemed to capture the very essence of desolation and despair that hung heavy in the air. As she moved deeper into the town, she felt a growing sense of unease, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. One building in particular caught Anna's attention, the Pine Hollow Hotel. It stood at the end of the main street, its grandeur faded but still imposing. The hotel's history was steeped in tragedy. It had once been a luxurious destination for travelers, but a devastating fire had claimed the lives of several guests and staff members. Since then, it had been left to decay. a ghostly reminder of the town's past. Anna pushed open the heavy, ornate doors and stepped into the lobby. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of smoke still lingered. She could almost hear the echoes of laughter and conversation from a bygone era. Her camera clicked as she captured the grand staircase, the shattered chandeliers, and the peeling wallpaper. As she ventured further into the hotel, she found herself drawn to the ballroom. It was a vast cavernous space with a high ceiling and large windows that allowed the pale moonlight to filter in. The floor was littered with debris, and the once elegant decor had long since deteriorated. Anna set up her tripod and began to take long exposure shots, hoping to capture any spectral phenomena. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine. She turned to see a faint, ghostly figure standing at the far end of the room. It was a woman in a flowing dress, her face obscured by shadows. Anna's heart raced as she snapped photo after photo, her hands trembling. The figure remained still, watching her with an unsettling intensity. A moment later, the apparition vanished, leaving Anna alone in the darkened ballroom. She reviewed the images on her camera's screen, her breath catching in her throat. The woman was clearly visible in several shots, her eyes seemingly staring directly at the lens. Anna knew she had captured something extraordinary, something that would cement her reputation as a photographer of the supernatural. Satisfied and thrilled with these unbelievable photos, Anna decided it was time to leave Pine Hollow. As she made her way back to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. The shadows seemed to move with her, and the silence felt oppressive. She quickened her pace, eager to put the haunted town behind her. The drive home was uneventful, but Anna's mind was racing with thoughts of the ghostly woman in the ballroom. She couldn't wait to examine the details of the photographs more clearly. Little did she know, she had brought more than just pictures back with her. That night, as she prepared for bed, strange things began to happen. The temperature in her apartment dropped suddenly, and she heard faint whispers echoing through the rooms. Objects moved on their own, and she felt an inexplicable sense of dread. She tried to brush it off as her imagination, but the occurrences grew more frequent and intense. Over the next few days, Anna's apartment became a hive of paranormal activity. Doors slammed shut, lights flickered, and she could hear footsteps following her wherever she went. The ghostly woman from the ballroom appeared in her dreams, always watching, always silent. Anna's once peaceful home had become a prison of fear. Desperate for answers, Anna turned to her photographs. She spent hours going over them, looking for any clues that might explain the haunting. In one of the images, she noticed something she had missed before, a small ornate locket around the ghostly woman's neck. It glinted in the moonlight, almost as if it were calling out to her. Determined to solve the mystery, Anna returned to Pine Hollow. She made her way back to the hotel and into the ballroom, hoping to find the locket. As she searched the debris-strewn floor, she felt a familiar chill in the air. The ghostly woman appeared once more, her expression sorrowful yet intense. Anna spoke to the apparition, her voice trembling. "What do you want? Why are you haunting me?" The ghost remained silent, but pointed to a corner of the room. Anna followed her gaze and found a dusty, tarnished locket hidden beneath a pile of rubble. She picked it up and examined it closely. Inside was a small photograph of a young girl and a lock of hair. Anna felt a wave of sadness wash over her as she realized the significance of the locket. It had belonged to the ghostly woman, and the girl in the photograph was likely her daughter. The ghost gestured towards the locket and then pointed at Anna. It was clear that she wanted Anna to keep it, to remember her story. Anna nodded, promising to honor her memory. As she did, the ghostly woman smiled faintly and began to fade away, her presence lifting from the room. Anna returned home, feeling a sense of relief and closure. She placed the locket on her bedside table and hoped that the haunting would cease. For a while, it seemed that peace had been restored. The whispers and the footsteps stopped, and her apartment felt warm and inviting once more. However, the ghostly woman was not entirely gone. She still appeared in Anna's dreams, but now there was a sense of calm and gratitude in her presence. Anna realized that the spirit had found solace in knowing her story would not be forgotten. Anna continued her work as a photographer, but she approached her subjects with a newfound respect for the spirits she captured. The locket remained a constant reminder of her experience in Pine Hollow and the connection she had formed with the ghostly woman. Though the haunting had ended, the memories lingered, forever etched in the photographs and in Anna's heart. In time, Anna's work gained even greater acclaim, not just for the eerie beauty of her images, but for the deep empathy and understanding she brought to her subjects. The haunting of Pine Hollow had changed her, and through her lens, she shared the stories of the forgotten and the lost, giving them a voice that transcended the veil between the living and the dead. The Haunting Melody. The narrow streets of Blackthorn Hollow were a labyrinth of cobblestones and shadows, echoing with the whispers of forgotten times. Vincent Gray, a composer with a penchant for the obscure, had come here seeking inspiration. His career had stalled, and he hoped that the town's rich history and haunting beauty would spark his creativity. One evening, while wandering the alleys, Vincent stumbled upon a quaint, dusty bookstore. Its sign, barely legible, read, "Arcane Tomes and Melodies." Drawn by a force he couldn't quite explain, he entered. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and leather. "May I help you?" a soft voice asked. Vincent turned to see an elderly man with piercing blue eyes standing behind the counter. "I'm looking for something unique," Vincent replied, glancing at the shelves filled with ancient books and manuscripts. "Something that can inspire my music." The old man's eyes sparkled with interest. "I might have just the thing." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a weathered, leather-bound book. "This is The Symphony of the Abyss, an incomplete musical score. It's said to have been written by a composer who vanished under mysterious circumstances." Vincent took the book, feeling a strange connection to it. The pages were filled with intricate notations, but several sections were missing. "Why was it never finished?" he asked. The old man's expression turned somber. "Legend has it that the music has the power to summon the dead." The composer supposedly became obsessed with it and was never seen again. Be cautious if you choose to work on it. Intrigued and undeterred, Vincent purchased the book and returned to his small rented apartment. That night, he began to play the incomplete symphony on his piano. The notes flowed effortlessly, creating a hauntingly beautiful melody that resonated deep within his soul. As he played, Vincent felt a strange presence in the room. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to dance at the edges of his vision. He dismissed it as his imagination, fueled by the eerie story behind the music. But as the days passed, his obsession with the piece grew. Vincent spent hours poring over the score, trying to decipher the missing sections. He began to have vivid dreams of a dark figure watching him, its eyes burning with malevolent intent. Each morning, he awoke with fragments of new music in his mind, which he eagerly added to the score. One night, as he played the newly completed section, a cold draft swept through the room. The lights flickered and the shadows on the walls twisted into grotesque shapes. Suddenly, a voice whispered in his ear, sending chills down his spine. "Finish it." Vincent's heart raced, but he couldn't stop. He felt compelled to continue, each note drawing him deeper into the music's dark embrace. He began to isolate himself, ignoring phone calls and visitors, consumed by the need to complete the symphony. As he added more notes, the hauntings grew more intense. He saw apparitions of long-dead composers and musicians, their eyes hollow and accusing. Objects moved by themselves, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The dark figure from his dreams appeared more frequently, its presence suffocating and oppressive. One evening, Vincent's old friend Claire, a talented violinist, came to check on him. She found him pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. "Vincent, you look terrible. What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," he replied curtly, his fingers twitching as if they were playing an invisible piano. "I just need to finish this piece." Claire glanced at the scattered sheets of music everywhere. "This is not healthy. You need to take a break." But Vincent wouldn't listen. He pushed her away, consumed by his obsession. Claire, refusing to leave him in such a state, decided to stay and keep an eye on him. That night, as Vincent played the latest section of the symphony, the temperature in the room plummeted. Claire shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Vincent, please stop. This is not normal." Ignoring her, Vincent continued to play, his eyes glazed over. The shadows in the room deepened, and the dark figure materialized behind him. Claire gasped, backing away in terror. "Vincent, behind you!" He turned slowly, seeing the entity for the first time in the waking world. It was a tall, cloaked figure with a skeletal face and eyes that burned with unholy fire. "Finish the symphony," it rasped, its voice echoing in the room. Terrified, Claire grabbed Vincent's arm. "We need to leave, now." Vincent shook his head, his voice a mere whisper. "I can't. It's too late." Desperate, Claire snatched the music sheets from the piano and tore them apart. The dark figure let out a spine-chilling scream, and the room shook violently. Vincent collapsed, clutching his head in agony. "Please, Vincent, Snap out of it, Claire pleaded, tears streaming down her face. With immense effort, Vincent managed to break free from the entity's grip. You're right, he gasped. We need to destroy it. All of it. Gathering the torn sheets, Vincent and Claire hurried to the fireplace. As they threw the pages into the flames, the dark figure reappeared, its fury palpable. You cannot destroy me, it howled, reaching out with skeletal hands. Vincent grabbed a poker and stood between Claire and the entity. This ends now, he shouted, thrusting the poker into the flames. The entity let out a final deafening scream as the fire consumed the music. The room was filled with a blinding light, and the air crackled with energy. When the light faded, the dark figure was gone, and the room was eerily silent. Exhausted, Vincent and Claire slumped to the floor, holding each other tightly. It's over, Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Vincent nodded, his body shaking with relief. Thank you, Claire. I couldn't have done it without you. In the weeks that followed, Vincent slowly regained his strength. The hauntings ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Though he continued to compose, he never again touched a piece of music with such dark history. The experience had left a lasting mark on him, a reminder of the dangers of obsession and the thin veil between this world and the next. And while the symphony was never completed, its haunting melody remained etched in his memory, a testament to the power of music and the darkness that can lurk within it. Years later, Vincent would sometimes find himself staring at the piano, his fingers twitching with the urge to play that forbidden symphony, but he always resisted, knowing that some melodies were better left unplayed. The old bookstore, Arcane Tomes and Melodies, mysteriously vanished shortly after the incident, leaving behind no trace of its existence. Vincent never saw the old man again, and the legend of the Symphony of the Abyss faded into obscurity. Yet, every now and then, on cold, silent nights, Vincent could swear he heard faint whispers in the wind, carrying the echoes of that haunting melody, a chilling reminder of the entity that had once sought to return to the living world through the power of music. The Ladybug Plague. In the small, isolated town of Elmswood, strange things began to happen one autumn. The town was quaint, surrounded by thick forests and known for its picturesque scenery and close-knit community. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other and secrets were hard to keep. But this autumn, a chilling secret began to unfold, one that no one could have anticipated. It started with an unusually large number of ladybugs appearing in the town. At first, the townsfolk were delighted. Ladybugs were considered good luck, and children would giggle and catch them, letting them crawl up their arms. But as the days passed, the numbers grew. The ladybugs began to swarm in unsettling quantities, covering walls, windows, and door frames. They got into homes, cars, and even the local school. One evening, Mia, a single mother, noticed a particularly large swarm outside her house. She lived on the outskirts of Elmswood near the forest. Her young daughter Lily was fascinated by the ladybugs, but Mia found them increasingly disturbing. She tried to brush off her unease, telling herself that it was just a seasonal phenomenon. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Mia decided to do some research. She sat at her computer, looking up information about ladybug infestations. As she read, a sense of dread grew within her. While most sites described harmless occurrences, she stumbled upon an old, obscure forum post that mentioned something different. The post, dated back decades, spoke of a curse linked to a ladybug plague in a town much like Elmswood. According to the post, the ladybugs were not mere insects, but harbingers of something far more sinister. The town mentioned had been plagued by the ladybugs for weeks before something terrible happened. People began to disappear, only to be found later in the forest, their bodies covered in ladybugs, eyes wide open in terror, with no signs of what had killed them. Mia felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at the window, where a swarm of ladybugs was crawling on the glass, forming patterns that almost seemed intentional. She shut down her computer, deciding it was just an overactive imagination fueled by a creepy story. She went to bed, trying to ignore the unease that gnawed at her. In the dead of night, Mia woke to a faint whispering sound. She sat up, straining to listen. The sound seemed to be coming from Lily's room. Heart pounding, Mia rushed to her daughter's room. She found Lily sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. "Mommy, they're talking to me," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Mia's blood ran cold. "Who, sweetie?" "The ladybugs," Lily replied. "They say they're hungry." Mia looked around the room, and her heart nearly stopped. Ladybugs covered the walls, ceiling, and bed. They swarmed over Lily, who seemed unharmed, but terrified. Mia scooped Lily up, brushing the insects off her as she fled the room. The next day, Mia tried to warn the townsfolk, but no one took her seriously. They laughed it off, saying she was overreacting. But Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. As night fell, Mia decided to keep a close eye on Lily. She let her daughter sleep in her bed, and she stayed awake, listening for any signs of the ladybugs. Around midnight, the whispering started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Mia's skin prickled with fear as she realized the whispering was forming words. "We are hungry," the voices hissed. "Feed us." Mia clutched Lily tightly, her eyes darting around the room. The ladybugs began to pour in through the cracks in the windows and under the door, an endless tide of red and black. They swarmed towards the bed, forming a crawling, writhing mass. Mia screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the growing whispering. Desperate, she grabbed a blanket and threw it over herself and Lily, trying to create a barrier. The ladybugs crawled over the blanket, their tiny legs scratching and skittering. Mia felt them begin to bite, sharp pinpricks of pain. "Feed us!" The whispering grew louder, more frantic. Mia knew she had to do something. She couldn't let these creatures harm her daughter. With a surge of adrenaline, she leapt from the bed, pulling Lily with her. She ran out of the house, not stopping until they reached the town square. The next morning, the townsfolk found Mia and Lily huddled together, exhausted and terrified. They listened more seriously this time as Mia recounted the night's events. A town meeting was called, and people shared their own strange experiences. The mood shifted from skepticism to fear as they realized something truly sinister was happening. The town's elders spoke of an old legend, a story passed down through generations but long forgotten by most. It spoke of a time when the town was cursed and ladybugs swarmed as omens. The curse could only be lifted by a sacrifice, but no one knew what kind of sacrifice was required. That night, the ladybugs swarmed more aggressively than ever. The town was under siege, with people barricading themselves in their homes. Mia, determined to protect Lily, decided to confront whatever malevolent force was behind this. She remembered the forest and the stories of the bodies found there. Mia and Lily headed into the forest, driven by desperate hope. The whispering followed them, growing louder and more menacing. The ladybugs formed a thick carpet on the forest floor, crunching underfoot. Mia pushed forward, clutching Lily's hand. Deep in the forest, they found an ancient, gnarled tree. The air around it was thick with ladybugs, and the whispering was deafening. Mia felt a strange pull towards the tree, as if it held the answers she sought. "Mommy, I'm scared," Lily whispered. "It's going to be okay, sweetie," Mia said, though she didn't believe it herself. They approached the tree, and Mia noticed something strange. The bark was covered in old, faded symbols. She reached out and touched one, and a jolt of energy shot through her. The whispering stopped abruptly, and the ladybugs froze. A voice, clear and ancient, spoke in her mind. "The curse requires a willing sacrifice. Only then will the town be free." The ladybugs began to swarm around Lily. It seemed she was the one they wanted. Desperate, Mia pleaded with the unseen force, "Please, take me. Spare my daughter and the town." There was a moment of silence. Then the voice replied, "Spill the blood." Mia knew there was no other option. She couldn't let her daughter be taken, and she also couldn't let the town suffer. With a heavy heart, she made her decision. Mia took a deep breath and said to her daughter, "I love you, sweetheart. Always remember that." They hugged each other tightly, and then Mia suddenly scooped up Lily and took her to the edge of the clearing. Mia ran back to the tree and found a sharp rock. She cut her hand and let her blood drip onto the roots of the tree. The ladybugs swarmed around her, forming a thick, suffocating cloud. Lily screamed as she watched her mother disappear under the mass of insects. But as quickly as they had swarmed, the ladybugs began to disperse. The whispering faded, and the forest grew still. Mia was gone, but her sacrifice had broken the curse. The ladybugs vanished, leaving the town of Elmswood in peace. The townsfolk mourned Mia's loss, hailing her as a hero who had saved them all. Lily grew up with the memory of her mother's bravery, and the town would never forget the sacrifice that had lifted the curse. The legend of the ladybug plague was passed down through generations, a chilling reminder of the darkness that had once threatened their town. And every autumn, when the ladybugs appeared, the people of Elmswood would remember Mia and the terrible price she paid to save them all. Thank you for joining me on this eerie adventure. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and click the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload a new scary tale. Check out my other videos and follow me on social media for even more soft-spoken content. See you soon for another enthralling and unsettling tale. Stay spooky, darlings.